There are mornings when you wake up and everything feels heavy, not because something terrible has happened, but because you're beginning to shed the skin of who you thought you had to be. The moment you open your eyes, there's a quiet awareness whispering through your bones, reminding you that the journey back to yourself is not always loud, but it's always real. You don't need an alarm to remind you anymore. Your soul has become its own clock. Each breath you take now feels like a subtle invitation to return, not to the world, not to expectations, but to the core of your being that you've been taught to silence. And there, in that sacred stillness, you begin to remember who you were before the noise, before the patterns, before the masks. You remember a softer version of yourself, one who didn't need to justify every feeling, one who trusted without evidence, loved without fear, existed without performance. That version still lives inside you, not lost, not broken, just buried beneath layers of survival. And now she's stirring, not because she's desperate, but because you are finally quiet enough to hear her calling. As you move through the day, you begin to notice things differently. The sunlight pouring through the curtains isn't just light. It's a reminder, a mirror of the warmth you've longed to feel inside. The quiet hum of the world isn't just background noise. It's a lullaby inviting you to slow down, to be still, to listen. The aching in your chest isn't just pain. It's space being made for something new, something honest, something that isn't rooted in who the world told you to be, but who you truly are when you let go of all the pretending. You start recognizing the weight you've carried that was never yours, the shame passed down through generations, the silence inherited from those who never had a voice, the fear that came not from your own choices, but from the way others taught you to see yourself. You look at those burdens, and for the first time, you stop calling them your identity. You see them for what they are: armor, heavy, protective, and no longer necessary. And so you begin the sacred work of laying it down, piece by piece, story by story, until what's left is not a version, but the truth. And the truth is this: you were never too much. You were just living in spaces too small. You were never broken. You were just bending yourself to fit into containers not built for your depth. You were never lost. You were just wandering through a world that taught you to forget. But now you remember. Maybe not all at once, maybe not clearly, but deeply, in a way that rises from your chest and settles into your breath. You don't need to explain it. You just need to let it be felt. So you begin to feel, without apology, without judgment, without rushing to label or fix. You feel the ache of what you've buried. You feel the yearning you've silenced. You feel the beauty you've longed to embrace but feared was too bold, too loud, too big. You stop turning away. You look yourself in the mirror and meet your own eyes, not with critique, but with compassion. You say, "I see you. I hear you. I'm not abandoning you this time." And something shifts. The walls you built to protect yourself begin to crack, not to collapse you, but to free you. You begin to speak differently, not louder, not more, but with more presence. You speak from the parts of you that have known silence intimately. You speak not to impress, but to connect. And when you don't have words, you let your presence do the talking. You don't force conversations that drain you. You don't fake laughter to fill the quiet. You sit in the spaces in between and let them hold you. Because now you trust the silence as much as the sound. And when the world moves fast around you, when everyone else is running, proving, climbing, shouting, you don't join the noise. You stay slow, you stay steady, you stay anchored. Not because you're lazy or indifferent, but because you've learned that your soul doesn't thrive in urgency. It blooms in presence, it expands in peace. So you choose slow mornings, long walks, deep breaths. You trade ambition for alignment. You stop asking, "What can I do to be seen?" and start asking, "What feels true to me right now?" And you trust the answer, even if no one else understands it. You begin to rewrite your definition of strength. It's no longer about endurance. It's not about holding everything together or smiling through the storm. Strength, you now know, is vulnerability. It's crying without shame. It's resting without guilt. It's walking away from what doesn't serve you, even when it's familiar. It's saying no, not because you're selfish, but because you finally know your worth. It's standing in your truth when it would be easier to stay quiet. It's being soft in a world that tells you to be hard. You no longer seek healing as a destination. You don't treat it like a checklist. You stop needing to arrive. You begin to see healing as a relationship with your body, your mind, your past, your truth. A relationship that deepens over time, that evolves, that isn't always pretty, but is always honest. You don't shame yourself for still hurting. You don't rush your grief. You hold space for the parts of you still tender, still raw, still learning how to breathe freely. You hold them with kindness, with reverence, with love. And love, it changes form. It's no longer something you chase, perform for, or beg to stay. It's something you are, something you give without depletion, something you receive without question. You love yourself not because you've reached perfection, but because you stopped waiting for it. You love the parts of you that no one clapped for, the versions of you that were never celebrated, the feelings you once hid to be accepted. You love without conditions, without timelines, without performance. And that love, it frees you. You stop seeking safety in the predictable. You stop clinging to routines that keep you numb. You allow change. You invite evolution. You let go of who you were last year, last week, yesterday. Not because she was wrong, but because you are no longer the same. You welcome the unknown, not with fear, but with openness, because now you trust yourself to navigate it, to meet it with grounded presence. You no longer need to know what's next to feel secure. You trust your ability to respond with grace, with truth, with integrity. You begin to surround yourself with people who see you, not the version you present, but the real you. The you who cries for no reason, the you who gets quiet in crowds, the you who feels deeply and speaks softly. You stop settling for proximity when you crave intimacy. You stop giving your time to those who only tolerate you. You choose connection that honors your complexity. You choose relationships that breathe with you, not suffocate you. You choose love that feels like freedom. And most of all, you choose yourself. Every day, in small ways, in big ways, in the way you pause when your body is tired, in the way you say no when your heart isn't in it, in the way you stop apologizing for your needs. You don't abandon yourself to belong. You don't betray your truth for approval. You belong to yourself now, fully, finally. There's a turning point in your inner journey when you no longer chase clarity as something to acquire, but rather embrace confusion as a valid, sacred state of being. You stop demanding immediate answers from a universe that has always moved with its own rhythm, not yours. You begin to sit with the unknown, not in fear, but in trust. It's uncomfortable at first. Your mind screams for certainty, for structure, for safety in the familiar. But something deeper, something older, something wiser begins to whisper, "Be still. Let this teach you." And so, you stay. Staying with the unknown becomes its own kind of devotion. Not to outcomes, not to plans, but to presence, to your own breath, to the unfolding mystery that is your becoming. You stop thinking life owes you constant understanding. You realize that life isn't about mastering control, it's about deepening surrender. So you surrender, not in defeat, but in reverence. You surrender your timelines, your projections, your need to rush healing into something you can measure. You give yourself permission to not know. And in doing so, you begin to touch something that feels like freedom. You walk more gently now, not just with others, but with yourself. You don't demand perfection from your days. You don't shame yourself for having moments where your past still echoes through your present. You understand that healing is like the ocean. Some days it pulls you under. Other days it carries you with its current. You ride the waves, you stop fighting the tide. You learn to float, even when you're not sure which way the shore is. And maybe for the first time, floating feels more like living than all the striving ever did. Your reflection becomes a place of grace, not critique. You meet your own gaze and no longer scan for flaws. You see softness in your eyes and honor it. You trace the lines in your face and thank them. You look at your body, Not through the lens of what it should be, but through the awe of what it has carried. Every bruise, every scar, every curve, every stretch. You stop trying to fit into clothes designed for someone who never had your story. You wear your story now, proudly, in your posture, in your voice, in the way you take up space without asking permission. And when your old wounds surface, when that ache in your chest stirs for reasons you can't name, you don't panic. You breathe, you say, you're allowed to be here. You stop exiling your grief. You make room for it at your table. Not because you want to, and slowly it begins to loosen. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it no longer controls the way you show up in the world. You become more honest, not just with others, but with yourself. You name what you need. You stop pretending to be okay just to make others comfortable. You say, I'm tired. I'm confused. I need space. You don't explain your boundaries to people who never respected them to begin with. You don't shape your truth into something palatable. You speak with softness, yes, but also with strength. And that blend of tenderness and truth, it becomes your new language. One that doesn't demand understanding, only respect. You start making decisions that feel like home in your body. You no longer say yes out of obligation. You no longer confuse being liked with being loved. You walk away from conversations that feel like self-abandonment. You don't explain your discomfort, you honor it. You don't justify your intuition, you follow it. You allow your energy to be sacred, to be sovereign. And if that means losing relationships that were only meant to survive your silence, so be it. You'd rather be alone in authenticity than surrounded in pretense. You return to the basics, not because you're regressing, but because you're remembering. The sound of your breath, the feel of warm water on your skin, the way the wind moves through your hair, the way your favorite song feels in your chest. These are not small things. These are not meaningless. These are doorways back to yourself. You walk through them slowly. You stop treating joy like a reward for achievement. You stop postponing peace until you've done enough. You let yourself feel good now, even if it's just for a moment, even if it doesn't last, because now you know that moments are all we ever really have. You stop needing your life to look impressive. You don't care if others think you've made it. You're no longer building a life for the highlight reel. You're building a life that feels like truth. You measure success differently now, by how often you laugh, by how safe your body feels, by how much time you spend doing things that feed your soul. You don't rush your mornings anymore. You let the sun hit your face. You write things you don't show anyone. You take pictures that never get posted. You live for the experience, not for the applause. And slowly, you redefine everything. What it means to be happy, what it means to be whole, what it means to love. You don't want the kind of love that demands you perform. You want the kind that watches you fall apart and says, I'll sit with you here. You don't want the kind of joy that disappears when things get hard. You want the kind that stays, steady like breath, even when the storm comes. You don't want the kind of life that looks perfect but feels empty. You want the kind that feels like exhale, like truth, like home. So you start building that home, first in your thoughts, then in your choices, then in your days. You decorate it with forgiveness, with boundaries, with stillness. You let it smell like safety and sound like laughter. You fill it with people who don't need you to be anything but yourself. And most of all, you live in it, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as its rightful owner. No more renting space in other people's stories. No more sleeping on the floor of your own worth. You claim it. You live it, fully. There's a quiet kind of strength that begins to rise in you the moment you realize you no longer need to be everything for everyone. It's subtle at first, like a faint breeze moving through the trees of your soul, but it's there, shifting something permanent within you. You stop trying to manage everyone's perception of you. You let people think what they want. You stop over-explaining yourself to those who never really listened in the first place. You stop showing up in spaces that drain you just because you've always shown up before. That version of you, the one who overextended, who said yes out of fear, who kept everyone comfortable while silently falling apart, she's tired, and you've finally given her permission to rest. Rest doesn't just mean sleep anymore. It means choosing stillness over performance. It means turning your phone off and choosing presence instead of distraction. It means letting the dishes wait so you can sit in the sunlight for a while. It means not feeling guilty when you do nothing, because now you understand that being is just as important as doing. That your worth isn't measured by your productivity. That your spirit doesn't thrive on constant motion. That your peace isn't something you earn, but something you reclaim, one breath at a time. And as you begin to live this way, something extraordinary happens. You notice the colors in your life more vividly. The green of the leaves, the gold of the sunrise, the softness in someone's voice when they say your name with love. You don't just see things, you feel them. You let the beauty of small things move you. The scent of rain on pavement, the sound of laughter coming from another room, the way your heart softens when a stranger holds the door open. You stop needing grand events to feel alive. You stop chasing highs. You find joy in the in-between. You begin to see that you are your own sanctuary, that everything you've been searching for, peace, love, safety, belonging, it lives inside of you. You've just been taught to search outward, but no one else can give you what you've always carried. You are the home you've been waiting to come back to. And now that you're here, you start building walls that protect your spirit instead of hide it. You build windows that let light in, and doors that open only for those who knock with kindness. You no longer leave your soul unlocked for anyone who walks by. You start forgiving yourself, not in dramatic declarations, but in the way you stop punishing yourself for things you didn't know then. You hold your past self with softness. You say you were doing your best. I see that now. You stop dissecting old mistakes and start honoring the wisdom they gave you. You understand now that regret is not meant to be a cage. It's meant to be a compass. And you use it wisely, not to imprison yourself, but to walk forward with more grace, more truth, more clarity. You begin to measure time differently, not in deadlines, not in goals, but in moments of presence. You start asking, how much did I feel today? Instead of, how much did I get done? You count time in laughs and pauses in the way your heart felt safe or not. You stop racing toward the future and start sinking into the now. You stop seeing time as something to outrun and start seeing it as something to be in relationship with. Something sacred, something that doesn't need to be managed but honored. And when the inevitable pain of life returns, as it always does, you meet it differently. You don't run, you don't numb. You welcome it like an old teacher, one who doesn't speak gently but always leaves a gift. You let it burn what no longer serves. You let it soften what was too rigid. You let it show you what matters. You don't ask it to go away before it's done teaching. You sit with it. And in that sitting, you grow, not because you avoided the pain, but because you faced it and stayed. You redefine intimacy. It's no longer about proximity, about who's always around. It's about energy. It's about who sees you when you're quiet, who feels you when you're guarded, who meets you in your shadows, not just your light. You don't crave constant connection anymore. You crave realness. You crave depth. You'd rather have one conversation that opens your soul than a dozen that skim the surface. You stop answering out of obligation. You stop performing in relationships. You start choosing people who choose you with intention, not convenience. You hold space for contradiction, for the complexity of being human. You don't shame yourself for laughing after crying, for being grateful while grieving, for holding both hope and hurt at once. You understand now that growth isn't linear, that healing doesn't always look like forward motion, that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen in what looks like retreat. You stop labeling your experiences as good or bad. You let them be. You let them shape you. You trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't understand. You become more mindful of your inputs, what you watch, what you listen to, who you follow. You stop feeding your spirit with noise that numbs. You start curating your environment like it's a garden. You protect what enters. You nurture what's planted. You weed out what doesn't serve. You treat your energy as sacred currency. You don't spend it on people or places that leave you depleted. You invest it where it grows, where it heals, where it returns. And when loneliness visits, As it does for every soul that chooses the path of truth, you don't resist it. You sit beside it. You ask it what it's here to show you. And it reveals that solitude is not the absence of love, but the space where real love begins. The love that isn't based on someone else staying. The love that doesn't change based on what you do. The love that simply says, I am here always. That kind of love, you find it in yourself first. And when you do, every other kind of love becomes a choice, not a need. You stop reaching for healing as a way to become worthy. You already are. You stop thinking love has to be earned. It never did. You stop performing strength and start embodying softness. You realize that peace isn't the absence of difficulty, it's the presence of truth. You choose truth now, even when it's hard, even when it costs you comfort, because the truth sets you free in a way no illusion ever could. You begin to trust your unfolding. Every misstep, every turn, every pause. You stop needing life to look a certain way in order to feel okay. You start feeling okay simply because you're here, because you're breathing, because you're trying. You find holiness in the ordinary. You see God in the quiet. You see yourself in everything. There comes a time in your journey when you no longer crave to be understood by everyone, because you finally understand yourself. You don't feel the urge to unpack your every emotion for validation or to be seen in your pain in order to believe it's real. You no longer reach outside yourself for mirrors of worth. You've become your own witness. You've walked through too many internal winters alone to not know now that your presence is enough, even in the silence, especially in the silence. The need to explain fades. The ache to be proven right dissolves. You begin to taste the freedom of inner approval, the quiet calm that flows from self-honesty. And with that honesty, you begin to meet the versions of yourself you once locked away, the parts that were too angry, too afraid, too loud, too soft, too broken. You invite them to the table, not with the intention to fix, but simply to understand. You let your younger self speak, and you listen without judgment. You hold space for the version of you who made decisions out of fear, not wisdom, and you no longer condemn her. You say you were surviving the best way you knew how, and I love you for that. And something within softens. Something that's waited years to be heard finally exhales. You no longer rush transformation. You understand that becoming isn't a race or a spectacle. It's a slow, unfolding process of remembering who you've always been underneath the noise. You stop forcing breakthroughs. You allow them to come like waves, on their own time, in their own way. Some days they crash in, loud and wild. Other days they barely whisper, showing up as a moment of clarity in the middle of an otherwise ordinary afternoon. You stop expecting firestorms. You start honoring the glow. And in that glow, you find warmth, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. You become more mindful of what you accept into your sacred space, not just physically, but energetically. You no longer participate in gossip disguised as connection. You don't entertain conversations that lower your frequency. You're not interested in bonding through bitterness anymore. You want depth, honesty, vulnerability. You want people who can sit with you in silence and not feel awkward. You want people who see the beauty in slowness, who laugh with their whole soul, who say what they mean and mean what they say. You crave realness, not just resonance, and you honor that craving without apology. You begin to reclaim joy, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. You no longer wait for everything to be perfect to feel happy. You dance in your kitchen even when the dishes are dirty. You let yourself laugh during heavy seasons. You find moments of celebration in the midst of uncertainty. You understand now that joy is not the absence of pain. It's the refusal to let pain steal everything. You let your joy be loud. You let it take up space. You don't quiet it down to match someone else's discomfort. You don't dim your light just because others haven't found theirs. You shine, you radiate, you trust that your joy is medicine. And when sadness returns, as it often does, you meet it like an old friend. You don't resist, you don't distract. You say, come in, sit down, what are you here to show me? And sadness speaks in stories. It reminds you of your humanity. It peels back the numbness and says, feel again. And you do, fully. You cry without needing to justify it. You sob without trying to control it. You hold yourself through the ache. And then, when sadness is ready, it leaves. Not because you pushed it away, but because you gave it room to breathe. You no longer view stillness as stagnation. You know now that rest is movement, that healing doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like pausing, like sleeping, like staring at the sky and letting your soul expand into its vastness. You understand that doing nothing is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. Because in that nothingness, your body recalibrates, your mind resets, your spirit speaks. You make space for wisdom to find you, for inspiration to rise without being summoned. You allow yourself to be without trying to become. Your relationship with your body transforms. You stop treating her like a project. You stop waging war against her softness, her tiredness, her changes. You place your hands on your stomach and say, thank you. You look in the mirror and meet your gaze with compassion. You stop seeking approval in reflections. You start finding acceptance in presence. You move your body because it feels good, not because you're trying to punish it. You feed it with intention, not restriction. You become more intentional with your words, not just what you speak to others, but what you whisper to yourself. You don't call yourself names in passing. You don't diminish your brilliance with sarcasm. You speak affirmations that feel like truth. You say, I am safe, I am worthy, I am enough. Not because someone told you to, but because your soul craves the sound of kindness. You understand now that the language you use shapes your reality. So you choose language that heals, that uplifts, that calls your power forward instead of pushing it down. You stop fearing solitude. You start craving it. You make time to sit alone, not to escape the world, but to reconnect with your inner one. You light candles just for you. You cook meals with intention. You write letters to your future self. You meditate not to clear your mind, but to come home to it. You walk slowly. You breathe deeply. You treat yourself like a lover you're falling in love with. And you are falling in love with your quirks, with your quiet, with your strength, with your softness. You realize that your own company is not a consolation, it's a celebration. And from that celebration comes clarity. You stop tolerating half-hearted energy. You don't settle for almost. You don't stay where you're tolerated but not cherished. You don't compromise your values to fit into spaces that never honored them. You walk away from inconsistency with grace. You detach from dynamics that ask you to shrink. You stop looking for potential and start aligning with presence. You trust that what's meant for you won't require self-betrayal. It will meet you in your wholeness, not in your wounds. You wake up differently now, not rushed, not reactive. You wake with intention. You stretch like someone who knows their body deserves care. You breathe like someone who knows their presence is powerful. You set your tone, your pace, your rhythm. You don't let the outside world dictate your inner world. You guard your peace with gentleness. You protect your joy with boundaries. You move through your day with purpose, even if that purpose is simply to be fully alive. And when night comes, you don't recount the day through the lens of what you didn't do. You don't measure your worth in tasks completed. You ask, did I honor my truth today? Did I treat myself with love? Did I live in alignment with my values? And if the answer is yes, you rest. And if the answer is no, you still rest. Because you know now that your worth was never dependent on your output. It was always rooted in your being. Eventually, you stop trying to become someone else and start peeling back every layer that isn't truly you. You stop chasing versions of yourself that were shaped by survival. The ones who smiled when it hurt. The ones who stayed quiet when their truth was screaming. The ones who made themselves small to keep the peace, to be accepted, to stay loved. You stop apologizing for the weight of your heart. You stop softening your voice to avoid making waves. You've carried the burden of being too much or not enough for too long, and now you simply allow yourself to be, as you are, without explanation, without shrinkage, without the exhausting pursuit of someone else's comfort. You stop needing life to be loud to feel meaningful. You find meaning in silence, in solitude, in your breath. You no longer need to fill every space with noise or movement. You let the stillness teach you. You realize that in those quiet spaces, between conversations, between goals, between days, you meet parts of yourself you forgot existed. The version of you that dances just for the joy of it. The version that writes without an audience in mind. The version that exists without performance. You realize that you can't hear your own truth when you're constantly drowning in distractions. So you turn the volume down. You create quiet. You create space. And in that space, you meet peace. Not the kind of peace that comes when everything is in place, but the kind that arrives even when it's not. The peace that says, I don't know what's next, but I'm not afraid. The peace that reminds you of your resilience, that even when things fall apart, you don't. You bend, yes. You break open sometimes, but you always return, stronger, softer, wiser. Not because you've mastered life, but because you stop trying to fight it. You allow, you flow. You become less attached to outcomes and more connected to presence. You no longer need to be healed to be whole. You stop measuring your worth in breakthroughs. You realize that healing is not an end goal, but a lifelong relationship, one that evolves, one that deepens, one that sometimes looks like crying at 2 a.m. and sometimes looks like laughing uncontrollably with someone who makes your spirit feel light. You hold both. You honor both. You let your brokenness and your beauty coexist. You stop separating the mess from the magic. They both deserve a seat at the table. You start loving in a new way, not from emptiness, but from overflow. You no longer pour from a cracked cup. You fill yourself first, not out of selfishness, but out of sacred necessity. You learn that your love is a gift, not a currency, not something to be earned or bought. You give freely, but you no longer give away pieces of yourself in exchange for proximity. You stop begging to be chosen. You choose yourself daily. And in doing so, you begin to attract people who see your fullness, not just what you can give. People who stay not because they need you, but because they value you. You forgive, not just others, but yourself. You stop holding yourself hostage to who you were when you didn't know better. You look at your past self with compassion, not criticism. You say, I see your pain. I see your strength. You were trying, and you let her rest. You stop replaying old conversations in your head. You stop rewriting history in your mind. You let it be, not because you're ignoring it, but because you're honoring its place as a chapter, not the whole book. You understand now that holding on is not the same as healing. You can love what once was and still move forward. You no longer chase closure, you become it. You stop knocking on closed doors, asking for someone to validate your experience. You give yourself the validation. You no longer need apologies to move on. You make peace with unfinished endings, with silence that's said enough. You stop demanding clarity from people who refuse to be honest. You choose to be honest with yourself instead. That's where real closure lives, not in the answers they never gave you, but in the truth you finally gave yourself. You begin to define success in your own terms, not by what you accumulate, but by what you release, not by how much you do, but by how true you are to your soul. You celebrate progress, not perfection. You find fulfillment in presence, not in accolades. You stop comparing your path to someone else's. You know now that your journey is sacred, that your pace is valid, that your timing is divine. You don't need to be further along. You just need to be where your feet are. And where your feet are, that becomes your grounding. You stop living in your head. You come back to your body. You listen to its cues. You treat it as a companion, not an enemy. You give it rest when it's tired, nourishment when it's hungry, movement when it's stagnant, stillness when it's overwhelmed. You stop punishing it for not looking a certain way. You start thanking it for carrying your soul through this world. You wear what feels good. You eat what makes you feel alive. You move in ways that feel joyful, not obligatory. Your body becomes your friend again. You stop chasing love. You start embodying it. You radiate it in the way you speak to strangers, in the way you show up for your friends, in the way you hold space for yourself on hard days. You stop needing someone to complete you. You realize now you were never incomplete. Love was never outside of you. It was always within. And when it overflows, it spills into every room you enter. Not to impress, not to be noticed, but because love is who you are, and being who you are is enough. You begin to dream again, not from fear, but from freedom. You allow yourself to want what you want without justification. You stop making yourself small just to be more digestible. You stop shrinking your desires to fit someone else's comfort zone. You dream big, and you hold those dreams close. You water them, you speak life into them, and you trust that if they were planted in your heart, they are worthy of pursuit, not because they'll guarantee happiness, but because the pursuit itself is sacred. You stop living in reaction. You start responding with intention. You pause before speaking. You breathe before deciding. You choose alignment over urgency. You no longer let triggers control you. You meet them with awareness, with curiosity, with compassion. You don't shame yourself for your patterns. You recognize them. You name them. And you lovingly choose different. You rewrite the story, not all at once, but one choice at a time. And as you keep choosing yourself, something beautiful happens. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. You no longer dread being alone. You don't fill every gap with noise or company. You savor solitude. You honor quiet. You create rituals that center you. A walk in the morning light, a slow cup of tea, a journal entry lit by candlelight. You stop waiting for someone else to show up. You show up for yourself, consistently, tenderly, devotedly. This is your return, not to who you were told to be, but to who you've always been beneath the layers. This is not the end of your healing, nor is it the beginning. It is the sacred middle, the space where you are no longer who you were and not yet who you're becoming. It's uncomfortable, it's liberating, it's holy. And you're learning to love it, to love yourself through it, to find beauty not just in the becoming, but in the being. There comes a moment when you begin to understand that letting go is not always an act of loss. It's often the first step toward true liberation. You've held on to so many things because you were taught to believe that release meant weakness, that if you love someone or something, you should never let it slip from your hands. But now you know that holding on beyond its season is how you suffocate your own growth. You've learned that some people aren't meant to walk with you forever. Some beliefs are scaffolds built for survival, not structures designed for thriving. And when they begin to crumble, it's not a sign that you failed. It's a sign that something stronger, something more aligned, is waiting to be built. So you unclench, slowly, carefully. You stop clinging to what no longer fits, even if it once brought comfort. You allow what's expired to fall away without chasing it. You don't beg for it to return. You don't try to mold it into something you can still keep. You bless it, you thank it, and then you move on, because you've begun to realize that not everything that feels familiar is good for you. Not everything that looks like love is rooted in respect, and not everything that once made sense belongs in the chapter you're stepping into now. And as the space opens up where those attachments once lived, you start to feel something unexpected. Breath, room, light. You feel the wind of your own becoming. For the first time in a long time, you're not filling every inch of your world with distractions, with duty, with people who only half see you. You've made space, and that space, instead of terrifying you, now feels like freedom, a blank canvas, not an empty void. You are no longer afraid of what remains when all the noise disappears. You are finally meeting yourself in the quiet, and what you find is not brokenness, it's possibility. You begin to see yourself with new eyes, not through the distorted lenses of comparison or criticism, but through compassion. You look at your journey not as a list of mistakes, but as a map of survival. Every wrong turn taught you something. Every dead end revealed a hidden truth. Every time you were brought to your knees, you discovered a part of yourself you wouldn't have met otherwise. The resilience, the softness, the unshakable desire to keep going. You stop seeing the cracks in your foundation as flaws. You see them as places where light got in. You start to redefine your boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as invitations for deeper, healthier connection. You say no with love. You say yes with clarity. You don't explain or defend your choices to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer overextend yourself out of guilt. You no longer tolerate energy that feels transactional. You don't need to be everything to everyone. You don't need to be liked by all. You choose your peace over people-pleasing. And you understand now that true connection doesn't ask you to betray yourself. It asks you to be more of who you really are. You become less reactive and more intentional. You stop meeting chaos with chaos. You pause, you breathe. You create a space between stimulus and response. In that space, you find wisdom. You don't raise your voice to be heard. You raise your presence. You don't argue with those who don't listen. You conserve your energy. You don't try to prove your worth to those who benefit from your doubt. You know who you are now. You don't need external validation to keep choosing yourself. You notice how your nervous system begins to settle in places where you're loved well. In conversations that hold space for your silence, in environments where you don't have to explain your sensitivity, in relationships where too much becomes thank you for sharing. You feel the difference between love that drains and love that nourishes, and you choose nourishment. You don't romanticize inconsistency anymore. You don't mistake attention for affection. You want what's steady, what's rooted, what lets you exhale. You reclaim your dreams, not the ones you inherited, but the ones that chose you, the ones that keep whispering in the quiet moments, the ones that feel too wild, too big, too audacious for the world that told you to stay small. You write them down. You give them breath. You stop editing them to be more realistic. You let them be what they are, expressions of your soul. You don't need anyone else to understand. You don't need a guaranteed outcome. You just need to say yes. Yes to your own longings. Yes to the path that lights you up from the inside out. And when fear shows up, as it always does, you don't see it as a stop sign. You see it as a signpost. You say, I see you, I hear you, but I'm not turning around. You walk forward anyway, not because you're fearless, but because your courage is louder. You've been afraid before, and still you survived. Still you grew. Still you showed up, and you'll do it again. This time with more intention, with more grace, with more truth in your chest. You stop performing your value. You stop auditioning for love. You stop trying to earn belonging by becoming what someone else wants. You realize now, you don't have to twist yourself into shapes to be held. You are worthy, not in spite of your edges, but because of them. You are lovable, not because you always get it right, but because you are human. And the people meant for you will never ask you to shrink. They will meet you in your fullness, not just your filtered highlights. You begin to honor your seasons. You stop blooming all the time. You let yourself rest. You let yourself go inward. You embrace your cycles of energy, of creativity, of emotion. You stop expecting constant productivity. You start valuing integration. You understand now that the winter is just as sacred as the spring, that the pause is just as necessary as the push. You don't rush your process. You let your life unfold with rhythm, not resistance. You stop being addicted to the next thing. You no longer wait for the perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect moment to start living. You live now, with what you have, with who you are. You stop postponing your joy. You drink from the cup in front of you instead of chasing an illusion of more. You dance in your living room. You take walks without your phone. You savor your meals. You treat the present moment like the gift it truly is. You treat your healing like a sacred ritual, not a task to complete. You light candles, not for aesthetics, but for intention. You journal, not for content, but for clarity. You speak your affirmations into your bones. You move your body with reverence. You pray, not just in words, but in the way you touch your life gently. You create space for grace. You become more yourself, not by effort, but by letting go of everything you never truly were. And in that letting go, you rise, not with force, but with flow. You don't ascend like a rocket, you bloom like a flower. Softly, slowly, steadily, you bloom in your own time, in your own way. And the beauty of it is, you don't bloom for others anymore. You bloom because it is your nature, because your soul was never meant to stay hidden. There is something sacred in the realization that not all growth is visible. Some of it happens quietly beneath the surface, in the privacy of your own becoming. It doesn't come with applause or external validation. It comes in the way you pause before reacting, in the way you take a deep breath instead of rushing to fix something, in the way you hold space for your emotions without judgment. No one else may see it, but you feel it. The softness in your heart where hardness used to live. The space between your thoughts that once was filled with chaos. The gentle way you respond to your own mistakes. These are the markers of true transformation. Not loud, but lasting. You stop defining your worth by how well you hide your pain. You stop treating resilience as the absence of feeling. You let yourself break without labeling it as weakness. You understand now that allowing yourself to fall apart is not failure. It's honesty. It's being human. And being human means feeling deeply, even when it hurts. So you sit with your grief, not as a problem to be solved, but as a part of your truth. You stop pushing it down. You stop pretending. You let your tears fall like prayers. You hold your broken pieces gently, and with time, they begin to heal. Not into what they were, but into something stronger, softer, more whole. And as you heal, you notice how your relationship with time shifts. You no longer rush through your life, counting hours and achievements. You begin to honor the seasons of your soul. Some days are meant for blooming, others are meant for resting. You don't judge the quiet seasons anymore. You don't see stillness as a lack of progress. You know now that rest is not a pause in your journey. It is part of the journey, essential, sacred. And you give yourself permission to lean into it without shame. You start to build a life that feels aligned with your truth. Not the life others told you to want. Not the one that looks good on the outside. The one that feels good on the inside. The one where your values guide your choices, where your peace is more important than your performance, where your joy is rooted in presence, not productivity. You simplify. You let go of what's not essential. You choose slow mornings, intentional conversations, and meaningful work. You no longer hustle for your worth. You rest in it. You begin to see love not as something to possess, but something to experience. You let go of the need to be needed. You no longer seek relationships to fill a void. You meet others from a place of wholeness. You love with